Welcome back. Demand for beef continues to be strong, but when it comes to the beef that ends up on their tables, consumers have a lot of questions about how it's produced and how sustainable it is. The Beef Industry Sustainability Assessment, funded by the Beef Checkoff, helps answer those very questions. And it also includes key findings from each segment of the industry, starting with the pre-harvest side of the production chain. Kim Stackhouse-Lawson and Scott George are back with us in the studio to talk more about the sustainability assessment. And joining them are John Butler, he's the Chief Executive Officer of the Beef Marketing Group, and Bill Cowser, founder of Cowser Cattle Company in Nevada, Iowa. Bill and his family are also the 2010 National Environmental Stewardship Award winners. Thanks again for joining us on this panel. We're anxious for another good discussion. And Kim, I wanted to start with you. I noticed that you selected the 1970s, 2005, and 2011 as key points to collect data for this life cycle assessment. Tell us a little bit about the rationale behind that.
Sure. So continuous improvement over time is a very important aspect of sustainability. And so we first wanted to benchmark that with the 2011 data. You know, where are we today? But we also felt it was important to look back in time to understand how our sustainability has improved. So the late 60s and early 70s represent the time period just before boxed beef, when we were still shipping swinging sides. And then 2005 represents the time period where we started to include distillers' grains in our feed yard diets, and ethanol became a very important part of our beef's production supply chain.
And Scott, maybe you can highlight a few of the key results that you learned from this pre-harvest segment.
The results were really fascinating to me because they showed that we are definitely increasing and improving over time. We don't produce the cattle the same way today that we did in the 1970s. We have made some dramatic increases. For example, just some of the ideas of things that have been brought out. We've improved grazing practices. We used to put cattle out on a big pasture and they grazed the whole thing and then it was done. We've learned that rotational grazing or even intensive grazing will yield more grass, which yields more pounds of beef. That's one area. Other areas, we've focused more, producers are more concerned about the genetics, making sure they've got the right cattle that can thrive, not only survive, but can literally thrive in the environment that they're living in. And those cattle are becoming more efficient. We're looking also, we see better management of how we handle the cattle, how we work with them, and also more attention to nutrition. All of these things have increased the production we're doing. We're finding out that we are producing more with less, which is the goal of sustainability.
Absolutely. And John, I'd be interested your thoughts as you think about the data that was collected both at the cow-calf as well as a feed yard segment. Do you believe that data is really representative of the entire nation?
You know, Kevin, it's a good question. As we looked at the beginnings of this trial or this life cycle assessment, that was certainly a question I had as a feed yard in feed yard management myself. And the Meat Animal Research Center in Nebraska had the data available. And then what we did is we took that data and tried to emulate it against our data from one of our feed yards. So we took one of our 30,000 head feed yards, a represented commercial feed yard, and compared the data. And when we say data, for example, feed conversion, how much feed it takes to put on a pound of gain, as an example. And it was very similar to the data that was up at MARC, or Meat Animal Research Center. So we, and I'm not a scientist, but we were very convinced that it does replicate commercial feeding enterprises.
And Bill, you well know that producers already do so much to care for the environment and to manage natural resources. How do you think this information is going to help do a better job of that?
Well, Kevin, one of the things that we've learned that we need to do more of, and we're doing a lot of today, is tell our story, is to get people to our farms and ranches and let them touch it, smell it, and feel it. And when we look at how we tell our story, we bring people in to help explain what we do there. We're very heavily involved in alternative technology, so we're worried about the environment. We're concerned about how we can take care of those practices. We've worked with science to involve the building of different structures, because in the Midwest we have the weather that we have to be concerned about and the terrible extremes. And then also with the ethanol industry there, we have many different feedstuffs that we're able to utilize. So when we look at our whole system here, it's all about us telling our story to the public out there and getting those people to our farms and ranches.
John, maybe you could highlight a few of the innovations that have helped improve the environmental footprint of the pre-harvest segment.
There's been a number, especially when you look at the timeline that is involved in this assessment, starting, for example, with animal health practices. And this goes to perhaps enhanced coordination and communication between my segment, the feeding segment, and the ranching segment, and where we collaborate way more than we used to in terms of sharing information, specifically as I referenced animal health. So the cattle come to us preconditioned. That's a relatively, it's not that new, but in the time frame we're looking at, there's a much higher percentage of cattle that now are preconditioned and fully weaned before we get them in the feeding segment, which makes a healthier animal, a more efficient animal, and so on. The genetics is another good example where we've been able to share information on how cattle perform and really capitalize on the best genetics and replicate that. So we have, a more efficient, higher quality, more consistent product that we can provide for the consumer. There's other things that we've been able to do in the feed yard that are opportunities. For example, delivery of feed stuffs. We now have figured out by the better rations that we produce, and we produce those on our operations, and how we deliver those to cattle. For example, now in the last 2 years, in 2 of our operations, we now use 2 less feed trucks. So we are able to deliver the feed to the cattle on a more consistent basis, but actually with 2 less feed trucks, which is less gasoline and less exhaust and so on. So there's just a whole host of improvements that we've been able to make over this time frame that have resulted in a much more efficient system and much more environmentally compliant.
And Bill, what pre-harvest innovations might you add?
Well, I think today, Kevin, when I put my farmer cap on, I look at my practices that I utilize in the field. Today we have GMOs, that corn brands and soybean brands, that the drought that we just went through last year, it's probably one of the best crops that we've had in central Iowa, just because of a few of the little rains that we had. We look at some of the bug problems that we've had over the past few years, and today we can control them with much less different things, or it's GMOs that are put into that, so we no longer have to handle that as humans. We look at manure management. It's huge on our farms today because it's eliminated commercial fertilizer. Commercial fertilizer is foreign oil. And when we take those natural nutrients back to our farms and our fields, and we look at what happens with the yields as they come up because of that natural cycle that goes on, we're just on the cutting edge of becoming better with IFS programs and planter systems to feed programs that we're developing through the renewable fuels industry.
You know, we have a lot to be proud of, but Scott, from a cow-calf producer's perspective, I'd be interested, what are some improvement opportunities from that sector?
There are things we're always looking to try to improve. One of them, obviously, as a cow-calf producer, is trying to work on reproductive efficiencies.
Sure.
Synchronization programs today are offering some great opportunities to producers because they can get all those cows ready to cycle at the same time. You get a more uniform calf crop. We're focusing on getting a greater conception rate. All of those things make us more efficient. Another area that we really have an area to work in is on how we handle our cattle. Research keeps telling us that consumers really want to know about how the animals are handled and that they're handled well. We've developed through the Checkoff program the Beef Quality Assurance Program, and for the dairy producers, the Dairy Beef Quality Assurance Program. That program has been devised with the input from cow-calf producers or producers themselves, veterinarians, animal handling specialists, and it's a voluntary program that we as producers can participate in, learning the best techniques, the best way to handle our cattle, the best management practices that are available for us today. And this is something that all producers could do on their own, and this is reassuring to the consumer when you say, you know, I'm BQA certified or I'm Dairy Beef QA certified. I'm following the best practices that are out there.
That's a great point. Kim, what additional insights would you have from a cow-calf perspective?
Well, I think the point that Scott just raised about becoming BQA certified is a really important one because animal welfare is actually the #1 sustainability concern. But really the pre-harvest sector and the post-harvest sector has just done a tremendous job, and everyone should be very proud of the improvements that we've been able to achieve in such a short amount of time. On the pre-harvest side, there is a gap in the research, and that gap is centered around what we refer to as biodiversity, or or really those very complex interactions of grazing and wildlife and open space, and how the rancher really contributes to that. And sustainability is really in its infancy in terms of research, and certainly life cycle assessment is very young too. And we haven't necessarily figured out how biodiversity fits into that equation. So that's going to be very important research going forward, and something that we're working on right now with the research team.
Very good. And John, from the feedlot sector, what might be some opportunities for improvement looking forward?
Well, pick up on what these two have said. The BQA program is very prevalent in the feed yard sector as well. And in fact, there's systems out there that allow us to measure, to actually validate that these best management practices are being adhered to. So once you get that, you can improve from there. Once you put a line in the sand and you measure that, you can then identify strategies and objectives to improve. And the life cycle assessment has really forced us down that path. And there's a number of programs out there that will allow that to happen, allow you to take that beef quality assurance initiative to the next level. So we're very excited about that. There's always in the feed yard sector, there's always ways that we're looking at for enhancements. Examples might include the feed that we deliver to the cattle, and how we can make even a more enhanced, nutritionally balanced feed stuff for the animals. And there's opportunities there with better utilizing resources that are available to us. Another area that we're looking at is where we actually bring the cattle to our operations from. If we can shorten that distance, then of course you've made a less impact on the amount of diesel that's used to move those cattle from one operation to the next. So there's a lot of opportunities for us to improve, but the main thing in this that is so valuable to us is putting a line in the sand to establish where we are today. And I appreciate the pat on the back that we've done good so far, but really our challenge is where do we take it from here, and how do we keep that trend moving forward?
That's a great point. And you know, we've talked a lot about production and efficiency. I guess, Kim, I'd ask you, how do you scientifically measure the social impact?
So that's a great question. And when we add social diligence into the sustainability equation, it really allows us to understand beef's contributions to communities. So a few examples of how that was included with quantifiable numbers are things like occupational illnesses and accidents, food safety, and animal welfare. So it really allows us to bring a quality of life aspect into the sustainability conversation.
And Bill, tell us how your sector and maybe your own personal business contributes to your own community.
Well, Kevin, everyone watching this program today is very excited about their own personal communities. And when you look at ours in Nevada, Iowa, we have an ethanol plant there. It's also produced seed production there, and we also grow crops. So we talk about being environmentally friendly, but we also talk about keeping those dollars at home. We're now processing those different products that are there. We're bringing the protein and fiber back to the feedlot and putting that through, or walking our animals to town. We're also selling some grain. And when we look at the communities that we're involved in, all those tax dollars and dollars go back to our communities as far as the fire department, the teaching facilities, and our roads. So when we look long term, we're renewable, we're sustainable, we're environmentally friendly, but we're also profitable. And what that's allowed us to do in our communities is bring our sons and daughters back home today, and to carry on this tremendous tradition that we have, and let them figure out how the future is going to go and build on this study as we go down the road.
I would say that's a pretty big societal impact. And John, what might you add? You have a little different type of operation in a little different part of the country. How do you contribute to your own community?
Similar attributes. I guess we really do focus on enhancing the communities in which we operate, and it varies from making sure that we purchase the farming produce and products that we can from those operations local, and we sort of have a goal within 25 miles of each of our operation. We try, example, to buy all the corn that's available, because in our farming operation we can't produce enough to feed the cattle. So we actually focus on supporting that local farmer and having a market for that product that comes into our operations. In addition, we're very involved in the communities from an employment standpoint. Our operations are pretty significant, and we're very involved in employing the personnel that's available in those communities, and it's an interesting. We have very low turnover with those type of local type of individuals because there's a commitment that goes both ways. I don't want to give the impression that we're the all end all. It goes both ways. They like to work in the local communities, and we have an operation that allows that to happen and really allow that sustainability to happen in that community and be solid.
And Kim, let's talk next steps. What are the next steps in terms of research from a pre-harvest standpoint?
So the most important next steps will be collecting regional data so that we can have regional sustainability assessments across the U.S. And the reason for this is simple, right? So cattle production is different in Florida than it is in northeastern Washington or northwestern Washington.
And Scott, let's think about the future from your perspective. Do you think this will be repeated, this study will be repeated in order to fundamentally track our progress over time?
This study would have to be repeated again. Like Kim mentioned, we've looked at the 1970s, 2005, 2011. We've got to continue to see that we're making continued improvement. And the only way to do that is to conduct the study again. And so, yes, it will obviously be repeated.
Well, there's a lot to be proud of, but clearly some improvement opportunities that we all have from a pre-harvest standpoint. I really appreciate your insight. We have to take a quick break, but when we return, we'll engage in a discussion with experts who are involved with the post-harvest sector of the beef industry. Stay with us. You don't want to miss it.